Welcome to Trustworthy Elections Today. I'm your host, Ron Bandies, the president of Vote Allegheny, a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization pursuing trustworthy elections in Allegheny County and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. There's been a lot of recent news about Russian interference in U.S. elections, but Russians are only the latest concern regarding the integrity of elections. Vote Allegheny has been advocating specific policies and choices of voting equipment since 2006. Today, we are speaking with two people who are part of a remarkable four-person team researching election security with particular focus on Allegheny County and Pennsylvania. They conducted this research for a capstone project as part of the master's degree program at the Heinz College within Carnegie Mellon University. I am joined by Will Kuna, who just attained his degree in Information Security Policy and Management, and by Salvador Ayala, whose degree is Public Policy and Management. Researchers who are not joining us now are MJ Emanuel and Koji Ina. Well, that sounds like a terrific combination of studies to address a critical public function, voting, which also uses computer technology and is subject to all the computer security concerns attendant to any computer system. Welcome, Will and Salvador. Thank you so much for joining us. So let me ask, you needed to choose a topic for your capstone project at the Heinz College. What drew you to choose election security?
Well, first of all, Ron, thank you very much for the invitation. We're very happy to be here. It's a very important topic. Study in depth, how can we use data analysis to better understand election security. I work for the Mexican Institute for Federal Elections, so I am very interested in see. I wanted to understand the U.S. election systems, but maybe Will has other.
Yeah, sure. So again, thank you for allowing us to be here and for the invite. So I did an internship with Department of Homeland Security last summer. And so DHS has a lot of involvement with election security, as you know, and so that's one of the main things that drew me to this project, as well as just it's a hot topic right now, and there's a lot of different aspects, whether it's data analytics or public policy or technology in general, that go into this complex issue. So that's what made it one of my top choices for our capstone project.
So, Salvador, why is it important to examine a swing state like Pennsylvania for your research?
Well, as we all know, swing states are known for being key determinants of election results. So depending on the elections, there are some elections that are more closer between the first and the second place. And in the case of Pennsylvania, we not only found an election that where it's called a swing state, but it is also a state with many electoral votes, which makes it very important for federal elections.
Right. And are foreign powers the only bad actors we should worry about?
Well, I would say no. We are worried about any bad actor, and anyone that tries to compromise the cybersecurity framework of the election system should be considered a bad actor. It can be a domestic group of people, it can be a foreign state, or it can be even an international organization.
Fantastic. Will, could you tell us what change in the Federal Department of Homeland Security that was made in 2017, and how did that change affect elections?
Mm-hmm. So the Homeland Security has designated 16 specific sectors as critical infrastructure. And one of the changes they made in 2017 was they officially designated election equipment and the processes as part of that critical infrastructure. And so there was initially concern at different levels throughout the United States that this meant a federal takeover of the elections, which it's not, because the United States elections are run at the state and local level, and it's very important that that it remains that way. And so what it did do, however, is it opened up a lot of resources to state officials and anyone working with elections to be able to access resources that Homeland Security has to offer them. It's mostly voluntary, but they have anything from risk assessments to the reviewing of processes that go into the elections at whichever level, whether it's a state or local, that helps unify the process across the United States and also bolster the security, whether it's the election technology or anything else that's used throughout the part of the process.
Fantastic. In fact, wasn't Pennsylvania the first state to take advantage of
That's
that
correct.
risk assessment from DHS?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, Sal, one of the conclusions from your work is that even a small number of votes altered by an attacker could alter many statewide races and could be thrown to the second place candidate. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, sure, Ron. We think this is one of the greatest contributions of our work, because it is well known that an attack can change the result maybe in an election. But what we tried to do in this analysis was to incorporate data analytics to demonstrate how many elections would change if a given attack changes a certain number of votes. So in a nutshell, what we did was we analyzed the elections from 2000 to 2016 statewide in Pennsylvania. So you have 56 elections in that period.
So not just presidential elections.
Exactly. You have attorney general, the state representatives, senators, all the offices that were elected between the 2000 and 2016, the 56 offices.
Yeah, but not local.
Not local,
like,
yeah.
Not like mayor.
Exactly,
Yeah,
you're
okay.
right. Exactly. State and federal elections, yeah.
Got it.
So what we did in this period, we found these 56 elections, and we analyzed the difference between the first and the second place to determine how many votes would we need, how many votes an attack would need in future elections to flip the election in favor of the second place. So we came up with a model, and the model that we have here says that if in a new election an attack changes less than 0.6% of the votes in favor of the second place, then that attack will not change the result of the election.
0.6%, so that's 6 out of 1,000 votes.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
okay.
But also, we found, for example, that if an attack changes 10% of all Pennsylvania voting turnout of a given race, then the attack will have about 68% chance of changing the result of the election.
So changing just 10% of the vote statewide changes 2/3 of the races.
Exactly, that is
Wow,
correct.
that's pretty incredible.
Exactly.
So to change half of the races would be what, about 8%?
I think it was 7%,
Yeah,
somewhere
wow.
between 7 and 8. Yeah,
Wow.
that is correct. Yeah, and well, that was our main contribution in terms of data analysis. And after that, we decided to analyze how can we change what attack scenarios would change 10% of the votes to get the 68 chance, according to our model, to change the result of the election. I know it's a little bit intricate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
oh, that's fantastic. So, well, you analyzed 6 scenarios for attacking elections in Pennsylvania. How did you determine those 6 scenarios?
So an important step that we had to take before looking at the attack scenarios is understanding the election process in general. And once you dig into it, it's very complex, and it's also different on a county by county level, on a state level. And so our first step was to look at what are the processes that go into the election ecosystem, we call it, and then, okay, so out of those, which ones do we feel like are the most vulnerable, and also which ones apply specifically to Allegheny County. So NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, is working on a voting security working group that I think they've had open for 2 or 3 years now, at least. And
I'm on it.
Yeah, there you go. And they have produced a lot of documentation on the standardization of what the election process looks like. So we started there, and then we compared those processes to how it worked in Allegheny County, and then from there we went through and picked our specific attack scenarios that we then analyzed with a risk assessment.
Fantastic. And how did you determine how serious each of those attacks is?
So we ran into an issue at the beginning in trying to how do you quantify risk in election security? Well, if you look at like the risk management framework or any others that have been published, a lot of them utilize a dollar amount as being associated with the level of risk. And in this case, election security is not necessarily, risk is not associated with dollars lost. It's associated with a ballot being changed or our voters' registration being compromised. And so we had to take the standard risk calculation of risk equals likelihood times consequence, and we modified that slightly to be the likelihood including two different variables, which was the number of actors that it would take to facilitate that, as well as the level of privileges that would be required to conduct that attack. So our risk equation turned into number of actors times amount of privileges, and our consequence was normalized across 10% that Salvador was referencing earlier. And so that was, we applied the same consequence to all our different attack scenarios.
Fantastic. And two of the attacks you examined involved the use of the cartridge that the poll worker inserts into the voting machine to allow the next voter to cast a ballot. What is that cartridge? Is that just memory, like the old game cartridges used on Nintendo and Atari systems?
Mm-hmm. So I'll have to be honest, I have not actually seen one and held one in person. I've only seen pictures of it.
Okay.
But when I first saw it, it reminded me of the cartridge for Nintendo 64 that you take out and have to blow to get it to work.
Exactly.
But in fact, it's been described, and what we've learned is that it's pretty much a self-contained computer.
It's an entire computer system. It's not just memory.
It's not just memory. And it's called a PEB. And so the purpose of that is every precinct will have three of them. There's a master and then there's two supervisory PEBs. And these are given out by the County of Elections before the election day. And in Allegheny County and for these electronic voting systems, the poll worker will insert the PEB into the machine and it basically loads each individual voter's ballot. And that's what allows the person to make their choices for who they want to vote for. So it's the control mechanism for the election system.
Right, right. So Salvador, how hard would it be for an attacker to get his or her hands on one of these PEB cartridges? Could I just buy one on eBay?
Yes, you can. It is actually very easy. You can go to eBay and buy one. Yeah.
Wow.
And I don't remember the cost. Do you remember?
I don't remember the cost,
Yeah.
but when we were looking at, can you buy these systems and PEBs, we did find that I think there was one Ivotronic system we found on eBay, and then we also have seen PEBs for sale, even on Craigslist or just throughout. So it's not unreasonable to say that you could access them and get them on your own.
Mm-hmm.
Incredible. So in your research methodology, internet voting was deemed the most risky by both of your measures, the privilege level that the attacker would need and the number of people necessary to carry out the attack, the number of people on the attacker's team. Please explain the risk with internet voting.
Mm-hmm. So internet voting sounds flashy and it sounds cool because it would maybe potentially facilitate more people to vote. If they don't have to go into the polling place, they can do it from home or they could do it from their phone.
We're told young people will only vote if we let them do it on their smartphones.
Right, exactly. But what we found, and it's been in testimony that we've seen as well recently, is that the opposite is actually true. Moving towards less technology would be better. And even in Mexico and in Japan, the optical scanners and the paper ballots, much just like a regular Scantron, that is the standard there. And that's for a reason. When anything is connected to the internet, regardless of how much technology and security is applied to it, there will always be a vulnerability that is either discovered or leveraged. And so at what point are we willing as a nation to run the risk of that being an issue for the increased benefit that voting online or voting from your home might offer you? And that's a decision that leaders have got to make in weighing the risks and the consequences. But at our level, we felt like identifying the risks associated with that were important to shed light on potential downsides of internet voting.
Right. So according to your research, which of your attack scenarios presents the greatest risk of actually being used against us?
Mm-hmm. So out of the 6 we had, the one that came out the most with the highest risk was the attack. We call it the attack of the online voter registration form. And so what that is it's a centralized system, and the state of Pennsylvania utilizes a database called the SURE database, and that is basically a registration of all voters in the state. And the reason that it came out with the highest risk score is because it's one system. You don't have to attack 500 or 1,000 different voting machines, but if you could leverage your access to just that one system, you could potentially change voter registration for anyone in the state. And that's why, since it had such level of low actors needed, but a high risk or a high consequence, that we rated it the greatest risk scenario.
So how hard would it be for an attacker to impersonate a registered voter and change their registration?
Mm-hmm. So a lot of the work MJ did was looking at that and figuring out, how likely or how easy would it be. And some of the research she found was pretty incredible, to where there were scripts that were found online that were supposedly doing different things, such as just looking at general election statistics, but they had tags tags included in part of the code that had voter ID. And so our question was, why do you need a voter ID in this program? And then if you go and look, you can go onto Allegheny County's website or the state's website and purchase all voting records for the state of Pennsylvania for about $20. So we actually bought that, and we found some of us included in that voter registration database that has name, address, the elections. It doesn't break down specifically what type of election, and then it shows party affiliation. So then if you can merge that database that's publicly available from the state with other databases that have either been stolen or leaked that are available if you wanted to find them and purchase them, you could put those two things together and within a pretty good level of accuracy determine where someone lives, how someone votes, and then the information required to change that in the actual system is you just need your last four of your social security number or your driver's license number. And so if you have that information along with the things I previously mentioned, the chance of being able to change someone's registration would not be too difficult.
So you're saying you would have all the information necessary to pass the registration system's authentication mechanism.
Correct.
To be able to impersonate the registered
Correct.
voter.
Besides validating that those pieces of information, that's all that's required. There's no two-factor authentication required or anything else in order to prove your identity to the system in order to change it.
And how would I know who to target? How would I know whose records I want to alter? Could I take advantage of social media?
Absolutely.
Because, in Pennsylvania, there's a lot of independent voters, so their party registration is not going to tell me which way they lean. So how could I determine amongst those independents which ones I want to alter?
So one of the other applications we found online, I think it was on GitHub that MJ found, was measuring just that, measuring public sentiment, and it would review websites such as Twitter and Facebook, where people post a lot of their political feelings or maybe their rants that they'll post randomly one day, and it will scrape that information, and it can be associated and tied to other databases that we mentioned to locate voters based on how they vote, how we think they might vote, and what they, what issues they feel strongly about.
And anybody could do this, or you have to be Cambridge Analytica?
You don't necessarily have to be Cambridge Analytica, but the level of information that's available makes it easier, and the technology that can automate that kind of stuff, I would say, makes it relatively. If you want to learn how to do it on your own, it wouldn't take too much time for you to be able to do it.
Wow. So you present several recommendations for the county and the state in your report. I'm sure implementing many of your recommendations would cost money. Can any of your recommendations be carried out for free?
So yes and no. So some of the ones we talked about, well, the first one was, budget needs to be allocated corresponding to the risk. And so one of the contributions we felt like our risk summary provided to decision makers is, okay, if I can spend 80% of the money or 20% of the money, let's say, and fix 80% of the problems, then maybe that's the best use of our time. And we did not have a lot of insight into how much money is actually spent on election security and how that might change. But there are some things that we feel like are relatively inexpensive to implement. Adding two-factor authentication to a registration system, probably if it's one system, is on this compared to replacing all the voting systems in the state or the county, probably much less expensive. Things that might be free, I don't know if we came across anything that might be free. One of the recommendations for absentee ballots and ballots that are mailed in is, can we offer some kind of certified mail that just provides a little bit better protection or for the chain of custody of that ballot when it's going from the voter to
Right.
the county of elections.
Right. Okay. So to both of you, what is the most important lesson that your team learned about election security while conducting this research?
So one of the things that I found the biggest takeaway I had was there's a big difference between what's possible and what is practical. So DEF CON recently, this past year, got a lot of attention because they were basically able to compromise every single one of the voting systems there. And so that explained to the audience what was possible. Yes, with enough time, resources, and an election system, in front of you, sure, you could break into it. But that when we looked at it on a county basis, needing to break into 500 DREs or 1,000 DREs to have any kind of measurable impact to that 10% threshold we talked about, that begs the question of if it's practical. So that's the difference. That's one of the biggest lessons that I took away from it.
Right. So they, at DEF CON, they did not attack all of the systems remotely, but they did attack some of them remotely.
They did, correct.
And so, yes, please.
I would just add that for me it's very important that to bear in mind that election security involves a lot of data, and there's a big opportunity there to utilize the tools of data analytics to understand the distributions and maybe create a probabilistic models to see what precincts, what counties, or even what states are at higher risk. In that way, we can target specific precincts, specific counties, and allocate resources more optimally.
So instead of allocating the resources uniformly, focus them on the jurisdictions and counties and states that are most at risk.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a very key point because the Senate intelligence report that came out last week said that very specifically. And I was kind of shocked to see that because that was one of the key takeaways I thought we took from our project was Allegheny County, for example, very important county, a key county in the state that if you changed, I think we said 44,000 votes was the difference between the winner and loser in 2016.
For the whole state.
For the whole state. So that's, I think, 68% of the Steelers Stadium that could have swung the entire election for the state. And so this intelligence committee report pointed out very specifically that key counties can have a much higher impact than others. And so allocating the resources based on that is important.
Makes sense. So again, for both of you, what can be done to take your research to the next level?
So we think it's important that this kind of collaboration continues. We were very fortunate to be part of this project at Heinz College here and taking what we have provided as just a starting point. And there's a lot of good work out there that's being done, but one of the things we found was that a lot of focus is placed on just the election systems, the voting systems. And so that's only one part of the process. That's, you have everything from the registration to turning, the delivery of ballots to turning those in. And voting and focusing just on election systems is not necessarily what we would recommend. Like, we would recommend looking at the entire process, incorporating data analytics to let the data tell you what are the numbers we need to be worried about, what are the counties we need to be focused on, and what are the processes we need to improve as an overall arching recommendation.
I want to thank you both, as well as the other two researchers, your project advisor, Summer Fowler, and the Heinz College of Information Systems and Public Policy, as well as the CERT Division of the Software Engineering Institute for conducting this important research. As far as I know, this is the first such research done with a focus on a single county. Your work and your report are outstanding, and I know at least one of you has expressed interest in continuing work in election security. It's been my great pleasure to get to know all of you. If you are watching this video online, please hit the like button. And if you live in Allegheny County, please join us at a Vote Allegheny meeting. You can find details on our website, voteallegheny.org. Thanks for watching, and get involved.